Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, the Pillowfort system joins us to discuss their sleep disorder and being part of a polyfragmented DID system. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Furman, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'd love to start out by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
So I think our story in the autistic community, really being a part of the community, begins online. We discovered that we were autistic back when we were 20, after a few months of getting really hyperfixated and developing a special interest in our own disability, doing a whole bunch of research into autism. We didn't really have people in our immediate social circle, friends and family in our life that we could talk to about neurodivergence, about autism. So we started sharing that on TikTok. And at the time, it wasn't even really a large part of our TikTok. It was not what we initially started creating. We quickly learned just how much the autistic community in general, but in our sphere of the online community, is really desperate for seeing themselves, for representation. And so we kind of quickly got swept up into the ADHD neurodivergent community online, and have been actively presenting as an ADHD creator for several years now. At least we've been on TikTok for about 5 years. We've been open about autism the entire time. So
I'm curious, how since you've been on TikTok, how have you seen that platform change? Because it's really grown in the last couple of years.
We have a very complicated relationship with really any social media platform as members of several different marginalized groups. The platform is grown very quickly, and I feel that TikTok struggles a little bit to keep up with how quickly it has expanded. We have seen lots of issues with censorship as the app has gotten bigger. More recently, that has got significantly worse. But we have also seen so much awareness for disorders and for conditions that the short form video content allows for connection in a way that a lot of other platforms don't. And the way that TikTok directly allows for connectivity and how you can respond to comments directly really allows for an interpersonal kind of connectivity in a community that is hard to get on other platforms. It's a mess. TikTok is a whole lot of things. It's a nightmare, but it's also a space that means a lot to us.
Now, I learned about you on TikTok, and one of the things you talked about is being a DID system, specifically a polyfragmented DID system. So for those that may not be aware of what a polyfragmented DID system is, what do you think are some critical things for them to know?
So first I want to cover what is DID for people who don't know. And I think it's really important to note here that we're not experts. We're just a system with our own lived experience. And this is a field of research that is very new and very contested. So we don't speak for every system here, and there are probably a lot of people who are going to disagree with some of the specifics. Essentially, what DID is when a child is experiencing a repeated trauma and they have a natural propensity to dissociate at a very high rate. The human brain is already set up, especially in childhood, to have layers of separation. If you think about the way that little kids when they're crying and then you hand them their binky, they're just like, they're totally fine. Like you flipped a switch. Children already have these different parts in their head called ego states or parts. When most children will have those parts have a natural inclination to kind of form together into one cohesive personality. For systems, what happens is those parts learn that they have to function separately for their own safety. And so they start to develop on their own with distinctions between them. The brain learns that keeping things separate and putting up dividers rather than putting those parts together and getting them to communicate is how it keeps itself safe. This is a profile of DID, a type. It is also known as complex DID or CDID. It is not known as PDID. That is a different thing. There are several different types of dissociative disorders, but polyfragmented DID is generally a more complex form of DID. The way that this is going to present system to system is going to look very different, but we see a lot of similarities across polyfragmented systems. Often, polyfragmented systems will have a very, very high alter count. There will be lots of those different parts. That brain gets really, really good at putting up those separation barriers between people. Often, polyfragmented systems will have a very low split tolerance, which kind of feeds into that higher head count, higher numbers. Split tolerance is basically what kind of pressure does a system have to go through before they will split a new alter. So for a much smaller system with less amnesic barriers, they might have to go through something really, really traumatic for the brain to be like, oh, I need to quarantine that off, or okay, I need a new part to deal with this. When it comes to a polyfragmented system, much more like mundane or day-to-day stressors may set that warning signals off. Like the brain is just much, much more sensitive to stress and will split much more easily. And it's kind of a perpetuating cycle of the bigger the system gets, the harder it is for the brain to reach back and get the parts that it already split to deal with it, because they have all these walls in between them. So that it's easier to just make a new one than get the one that you already have. Polyfragmented systems also tend to have a much higher level of day-to-day dissociation. We really, really struggle to remember anything. There is often a level of separation, even among non-systems. You might have like kind of your work mode that you get into and then the space that you're into at home. Like there's often some level of separation for people and the identities, the social masks that they put on. For us, our work self and home self can't remember what happened between the two parts. The level of day-to-day amnesia, the amount of things that we are able to retain is very minimal. Other brains are much better at putting down anchors throughout the day and being able to go back to that point and recall those things. Our brain does not put down anchors, and we often need other people to specifically tell us about something that happened to be able to recall that memory. If you ask me about anything that happened from this entire work week, I could not tell you without guidance. That's kind of how we function, which is we are so used to that level, high level of amnesia. What else about polyfragmented systems? Generally polyfragmented systems tend to be much larger, more complex systems that will have higher day-to-day amnesia and a harder time communicating, much easier time splitting. Oh, another really important thing about polyfragmented systems is the level of fragmentation. So if we're talking about alters, parts, there's lots of different words that you can, reuse to refer to it, and different systems are going to find different language comfortable. If we're talking about parts, different parts are going to be different levels of complexity. If you are a very small system with, 3 or 4 alters, those parts may be very, very complex. They have a really solid sense of self. They have their own interests. They have a name and a gender identity, a sexuality. They have this whole complex understanding of themselves. For us, we do have some alters like that, but we have many more parts that are I brush our teeth, and then I leave. That's my entire thing. Lots of little pieces to deal with little things throughout the day. And not all of us have a very cohesive sense of self or identity. There is frequently this flux feeling of like, I don't really know who I am. I don't really know what I like. It's very difficult to kind of get to know yourself and settle in yourself because we are constantly in a state of flux. At least our system is. There are polyfragmented systems that are a little bit more settled and are just quite large. We are very fluid.
As part of a system, you don't get to choose how you split. And I watched a video where you talked about, as a white system, having parts or alters that present or appear different from the race of your physical body. How do you look at how a system should approach this, or what questions maybe they should be asking themselves in these situations?
So I think up front, it is very important to acknowledge that we are a white-bodied system, so this conversation will be inherently incomplete. Very much encourage anyone who's listening to this to follow this up by seeking out the voices of systems of color. Yeah, when it comes to splitting alters in a system, you don't get to choose how they manifest, what an alter looks like internally, any sort of false memories that they might have, and the way that generally they present is not something that the system has any control over. However, system responsibility is very important. So we grew up in a very conservative Christian Midwest town, and we grew up absorbing a lot of really bigoted and racist ideals. And some of that has come through in the way that alters have split. We have alters who internally appear different than the race of the body, which very important to acknowledge. Again, any alters in our system are white, no matter what they look like, because we have the lived experience and we have the brain of a white person, so that it will always be filtered through that lens, regardless of internal presentation. But we have split alters who present some of those internal biases, who have stereotypical features. And it is our job as a system to not blame ourselves for that, but sit with that and go, okay, where's that coming from? And then that really just goes back to generally the work that everyone should be doing, but especially white people, of working through our internalized biases, working through our internalized racism and white supremacy, working through those colonialist mindsets, rooting out, like, where are these beliefs and stereotypes coming from? Like, making sure that you are seeking out and listening to the voices of people of color on this matter. And again, I can only speak from our perspective. This gets very complicated. There are a lot of different reasons why a system might split an alter that looks different than the body. There are alters that are non-human. There are alters that are inanimate objects. Like, this gets very broad. And our experience as a white system splitting alters that appear non-white is going to be very different from the experience of, say, a system of color who might split an alter that internally appears white. The traumas that cause these alters to form, the inherent biases, our internal day-to-day experience is going to be totally different. You've met one system. We don't get to pick how alters split, and frequently this and many other ways can manifest with alters internally being uncomfortable and presenting parts of the system that they need to work on. And it's usually the way that alters present internally and the way that the inner world presents is a reflection of the system, of the brain, of its processing and understanding itself. So it is simply part of that introspective work to look at the places where we clearly have internalized some things that we need to work on and go, okay, time to process that.
Something else on social media that you've talked about a good amount is having chronic levels of sleepiness due to a sleep disorder. So we definitely live in a culture where many of us are addicted to coffee, myself included, or energy drinks, which definitely mask our sleep challenges. So I'm wondering what might be some signs that someone very well could look for that they might have a sleep disorder in our culture.
So there's a couple of things to pay attention to. When you are starting to feel like when your circadian rhythm is kicking in, when you are feeling tired, like paying attention to what time that is happening at night. Is it consistent? Is it happening really late at night? Is it moving each night? Paying attention to your sleep patterns, how much sleep you are getting, the quality of sleep you are getting. If you are able to, sleep trackers are very helpful and they're often fairly inexpensive. I would recommend investing in one, especially if somebody is concerned about their sleep habit, and just paying attention to the level of daytime sleepiness that you are experiencing. We are still figuring out what a normal level of sleepiness is supposed to look like. For us, we are genuinely struggling to stay awake frequently throughout the day, every day, regardless of how much sleep we get, which is apparently not normal.
Thinking about normal levels of sleepiness, do you think our autism in any way impacts us being recognized or being diagnosed with sleep disorders more commonly?
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. The main issue that we ran into, the hurdle that kept us from understanding that we had the sleep disorder that we do, is our autistic literalism. We were taking the way that people talk about being overworked and tired in this, capitalist hustle culture, the way that people are like, oh, I'm exhausted, I'm falling asleep all the time. We took that very literally. And when we were attempting to communicate our level of sleepiness, other people did not realize that we were literally communicating. They thought that we were doing the same level of exaggeration. So autistic barriers can be an issue in any diagnosis, but this is how it presented for us. There is also autistic interoceptive issues. It is very hard for a lot of autistic people to connect with our body, to know. And autistic people in general often have comorbid problems that can cause sleep disorders or make sleep disorders worse. They are frequently comorbid, unfortunately. It's not helped by the fact that things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is very common, can cause us to have much worse quality sleep than allistic people as well. So even if you don't have a diagnosable sleep disorder, you may still be much more chronically sleepy than the people around you because of your autism, because of your disabilities.
One of the things I like about not just your social media accounts, but others that do this similarly, is when they're kind of focusing on different types of things. And one of the things that you focused on that is completely different than what we've talked about so far is supernatural comedy skits that you've had many on your platform. What is it about supernatural themes that bring you joy?
A lot of people don't know this, but we actually started our TikTok career on our old page doing acting content, doing original character role-play content. We started a role-play tag that was basically like it was a group improv with like set rules. We created a little world and then people could create their own character and join in. And we didn't realize it at the time, but what actually started us doing that was internal system processing. We based that tag and that world, those characters, off of alters and subsystems that exist within ourselves. And so acting and creating like creative content has always been like connected for us with our neurodivergence content. Specifically when it comes to supernatural skits, we love seeing media with supernatural characters. We have connected with it from a young age, and it's heavily reflected in our system. We are a system with a lot of non-human alters. We have a lot of vampires and werewolves and things that go bump in the night. We don't see ourselves reflected in that kind of mainstream media. So the idea of a werewolf who is autistic and has sensory issues and is unable to like go on a hunt with the other werewolves because they get fur stuck in their teeth, or the stressed out manager of a senior care facility for like old disabled vampires. I love to see myself represented in fictional media. I want to see more silly supernatural content with characters with visible disabilities and neurodivergences. I think that's so much fun. And it's frankly an untapped market because as much as DID is a very debilitating disorder, it can be very silly as well. It can be absurd sometimes. If this is a disorder that is formed in childhood, I like to create neurodivergent joy for myself and for my audience. And being creative and making supernatural skits is a way to connect with ourselves and connect with the media that we love and our audience and kind of bring all of our things together.
Your skits made me laugh because one of my favorite TV series is What We Do in the Shadows.
We love What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes, and it made me think about What We Do in the Shadows. So anything that makes me think of Nadja and Laszlo and Nandor, I'm a big fan of.
I take that as such a compliment. Thank you.
Yeah.
We do love that kind of content. The supernatural in a more realistic or mundane setting is something that just delights us to no end. I feel like that has something to do with autism. I can't pinpoint why. It is simply delightful for us to take that concept and watch it play out. Shows like What We Do in the Shadows are very much an inspiration. We very much a special interest. I'm waiting to find the fictive of the What We Did in the Shadows characters. It's just, sometimes you just need to have fun online.
And lastly, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
You can find us on TikTok at the Pillowfort System. Our content is arranged into playlists at the top of our page. If you are looking specifically for supernatural skits or just joke content or for more serious educational content about DID or autism, I think that's the only social media bot. Yeah, you can find us on TikTok.
Well, Vermin, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you very much for having us. This has been great.
Thanks so much to the Pillowfort System for the conversation. To learn more about the Pillowfort System, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what, as an autistic person, helps you to get adequate sleep. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self-directed, purpose-driven lives through our customized life coaching and community groups. Our distinct approach prioritizes each client's unique goals and preferences, fostering a sense of agency and promoting self-advocacy. Coaches work collaboratively with clients to develop personalized strategies and tools that can help with executive functioning, emotional regulation, relationship building, stress management, and more. We also support parents and partners of autistic individuals by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. With our accessible remote services, individuals from any location can receive the assistance and mentoring they need. Join us today to experience judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.